Hello, I'm your local girl reporter Zoe B, and I am here today with Ava H. She's a 7th grader at Riverside STEM Academy who was diagnosed with type 1 diabetes. How long have you been diagnosed with type 1 diabetes, and how did they know it was type 1 diabetes?
So I'll be type 1 diabetic for 12 years in July, I believe. I was diagnosed on my sister's birthday, and I was I was just easygoing as a baby. And at 18 months old, I never cried, I was never angry. Granted, of course, there's moments, but my mom started seeing an increased amount of anger in me, and I started wetting the bed a lot more. Every night I would wet the bed. And so she finally took me into her doctor, and he, dismissed her, was saying that it may be just the flu, maybe strep throat, some other sickness, and if we would have waited any longer to test my blood sugar and followed doctor's orders, I would have died. So it was really bad. I think my blood sugar when we got to the hospital was 700.
Can you please give me a brief description of type 1 diabetes, and can you tell me the difference between type 1 and type 2 diabetes?
Sure. So type 1 diabetes is basically, usually in juveniles, it can be in adults too, but what happens is we call them T cells. They are programmed to kill beta cells. So it's basically a virus that got infected and is changing the way this one type of cell works against insulin producing cells called beta cells. So what insulin does is it breaks down carbs and sugars into usable energy for our bodies. So that's the inability that I have and other type 1s have. That is the main difference between type 1 and type 2. Most of the time, type 2 is usually caused by genetics or a lack of exercise or when you're overweight, but sometimes type 1 is not genetic, and also type 1 can be a little bit more, I say it's worse because we don't have any type of control and we are on insulin, artificial insulin. We have to take injections rather than pills, or sometimes type 2s have to take injections also, but usually type 1s are only on injections, and thankfully there's new research coming out with inhaled insulin and all kinds of things that make living with type 1 a little bit easier. But ultimately type 1 at the end of the day is a little bit more difficult to deal with, and it can affect us much greater in a smaller amount.
How long have you had Bruin, and who is Bruin?
So Bruin is my 3-year-old diabetic lord dog that I got when he was 8 weeks old, and I've had him for about 3 years now. He is trained to detect high and low blood sugars as well as ketones, and so he can save my life on a daily basis. To begin with, I went through multiple companies, and we spent almost $15,000 on a fully trained service dog by local companies, but they ended up being just for the money. And so we went off. Oh, I just told him the place. He's a good boy. He's a good boy. So I ended up just training him myself because $15,000 for a dog is not practical, but for service dogs that's pretty much basic price. But this company wasn't doing what we needed, and they were very rude. So we went off and we went through 2 trainers that really didn't work for us until we got Bruin as a puppy, and I began training him by myself. And now I work with Tattletale Scent Dogs in Salt Lake City, Utah, and they're just one of the most amazing companies I've ever come in contact with. Casey, the owner there, has really taught Bruin how to become a great service dog, and her dogs save hundreds of people's lives every day. So it's a very cool thing to be a part of.
So how can Bruin tell the difference between when you're high and low with blood sugar?
So what happens is, just like anything in our bodies produce odors and scents that dogs can pick up in their olfactory receptors, which is interesting because dogs have millions more than we do, and then of course we have a lot of unprovoked bear attacks, and we think that that's because of diabetics as well. Animals have this amazing sense of smell that can pick up on chemical changes that occur in our own bodies. So scientists aren't really sure the difference, but we think that it is high blood sugar smells sweeter because there's more sugar in your body, and low blood sugar smells kind of sour because there's a lack of sugar. It also kind of smells like ammonia to scientists, they say. And then ketones are really high blood sugar. That's when our bodies are producing, basically when our body is using itself for energy when it can't use the energy that couldn't be broken down by beta cells. So ketones are not a good thing, and of course high and low blood sugar isn't, but scientists aren't really sure the difference, but there's definitely a smell ratio that they can pick up more easily, which are high blood sugars, because it's such a strong scent, as well as lows, but it's very interesting.
Bruin alert you when you're high or low in blood pressure.
Bruin, I taught Bruin some multiple ways to tell me. We started off foundation work with him coming and bopping my hand as a puppy, retrieving the scent sample, but it comes time where I am the living scent sample instead of a scent sample in a tube. So I taught him to paw me for a high, like a high five, and bow for a low, and then before that he would bring me a bringsel, which is a little toy that's pretty long that fits in his mouth, and just to annoy the heck out of me until I realized that, oh, there's something wrong, and then I ask him what is it, and he'll either paw me or bow to tell me if I'm high or low. I don't usually, the dogs that do well are based off of what the dog and the family needs, not just what the family wants. So that's why I still recommend tattletales, because you can teach the dog to alert however you want to. If you want the dog to spin in circles 8 times, whatever works. But you know, whatever works for your dog, they will figure out a way to get to you, even if you don't like that way. So sometimes he just is rude, but that's what he needs to do to keep me alive. So if I'm unable to treat myself or check myself when he's alerting, Bruin has seen that, well, dogs naturally go to the head of the pack. So my mom is the head of my household. I think all mothers kind of are. So he will go to my mom and kind of tattle on me, which is super funny because he does that to my teachers, my friends. He'll go to my friends and he'll tattle on me, or he'll go to my teachers and tell on me. And if I'm not listening to him, sometimes my blood sugar doesn't go up or come down as fast as he'd like. So he starts going around the classroom and telling everybody, but you know, that's usually after some arguments about civil disobedience, which is when I tell him to lay down and he goes, no, I'm not going to lay down because you stink. And then also Bruin has alerted multiple times from far away. He's been 10 miles away at my house, and I left him just to have a break one day from school, and he's alerted to my mom, and he's always right. A lot of people think that this isn't real, and that's totally up to them to figure out, but he's done it from states away. Dogs, they just know. We can't describe it other than a motherly instinct, and you know, people may not believe me on it, but once you see it, there is no way that you would be able to believe it. So.
What company do you work with for diabetic work dogs, and what company do you recommend for families?
So I work with Tattletale Scent Dogs out of Salt Lake City, Utah. The owner's Casey Owens, and she's been working with dogs for her whole life. She always told me that she took her first step holding on to a hound's collar. And so I got into dogs before I met her, and I started training them and trying to figure out foundational work. And it was really hard because communicating with a dog is different than communicating with a human. And Casey, when I met her, showed me the difference between that and how to effectively communicate between a dog, which is the real key to training. But Casey is an expert in the diabetic alert dog field. She's had one of the first diabetic alert dogs, and I've seen her puppies are at 4 days old every time. And she's just an amazing person. She has the lowest rates for cost in the country, and she should be charging way more for these puppies. They are amazing. But she is the most amazing person that anybody will ever meet in their lives, and so will the dogs. So I totally recommend them for any company. The family can be with the dog as it grows, and Casey guides them in training. And we have families all the way in England, all over the country, and it's just amazing to see how Casey can lead these people into training their own dad with her help. And ultimately, in the end, we have no complaints, and all the families go back to tattletales when their dog needs to be retired or replaced, which hasn't happened yet. But it's just an amazing company that I recommend for all.
Thank you. What is your website called?
So Bruin and I have a website that I made a long time ago for families that needed help in finding diabetic alert dogs, and for me to kind of reach out to kids that are having a rough time. It's called Team Ava and Bruin, and if you scroll down, it's a Google site, and you'll pretty much find it almost immediately. And it has all the information you'll need, contact information, and then I handle and show dogs as well. So I kind of got thrown into the dog world, and so it has all of that contact information as well. So it's just a fun website that you can find support on. And then my mom founded T1D Mod Squad, which is a support group on Facebook with a lot of almost 11,000 people on it that grew in 10 years. So if any parents need support, go on there and just introduce yourself, and these parents will take care of you.
Thank you. Okay, so how much of the population has type 1 diabetes? What are the signs of type 1 diabetes? And are there any cures?
Well, as of right now, there's no cure. And there probably won't be for a long time. Only 10% of the world's population of diabetics is type 1. And I don't like that they combine type 1 and type 2, but that's what happened. So 80% is type 2. And those are mostly adults, but of course that can occur in children as well. So for especially the signs and symptoms are extremely important, because I could have died if my mom wasn't if she didn't drive the force of finding out what was actually wrong with me, because all the doctors said that I was just sick, and I could have taken some antibiotics and it will all clear up, but that wasn't what happened. A few years ago, this little girl named Casey, who lives in St. George, Utah, died she was very young, I believe she was 7, because her doctors thought that she was just sick, and her blood sugar ended up going so high because she was undiagnosed that she was subject to brain swelling and passed away. So a lot of kids, this is happening a week ago. Almost every week we hear stories where the doctors are saying it's just the flu, it's strep throat, just common things like that, and it turns out to be type 1. And testing your blood sugar is literally less than $1. So we are asking doctors to, when they think that something's wrong, test the blood sugar, please, because that can save a lot of kids' lives. But when kids are diagnosed with type 1, they are immediately put on artificial insulin because their body cannot convert food anymore, and without it, of course, they'll die. And so, but we also have to be careful with too much insulin, because then we can go low, which going low is much scarier and much faster than going high. Lights out in less than 5 minutes if we're dropping very quickly. And then later we have insulin pumps, which help us regulate our blood sugars. There's now CGMs, which track your blood sugars for you.
Can you please give me a brief description of type 1 diabetes, and can you tell me the difference between type 1 and type 2 diabetes?
Sure. So type 1 diabetes is basically, usually in juveniles, it can be in adults too, but what happens is we call them T cells. They are programmed to kill beta cells. So it's basically a virus that got infected and is changing the way this one type of cell works against insulin-producing cells called beta cells. So what insulin does is it breaks down carbs and sugars into usable energy for our bodies. So that's the inability that I have and other type 1s have. That is the main difference between type 1 and type 2. Most of the time, type 2 is usually caused by genetics or a lack of exercise or when you're overweight, but sometimes type 1 is not genetic. And also type 1 can be a little bit more, I say it's worse because we don't have any type of control and we are on insulin, artificial insulin. We have to take injections rather than pills, or sometimes type 2s have to take injections also, but usually type 1s are only on injections, and thankfully there's new research coming out with inhaled insulin and all kinds of things that make living with type 1 a little bit easier. But ultimately type 1 at the end of the day is a little bit more difficult to deal with, and it can affect us much greater in a smaller amount.